I'd like to welcome Kumar Mangalam Birla to this very, very special edition of the Hindustan Times Leadership Summit. Especially apt, although this is not the reason we have him here. The reason we have him here is because he runs a really big group and a really old group. Also really apt that Hindustan Times was really a paper that was, in its early years, funded and founded by his great-grandfather, G.D. Birla. So very happy to have you here.
Good to be here, Sukumar. Thank you.
And I thought we would not do a CNBC quarterly results are out a kind of interview. This is the Leadership Summit after all. And when you get an opportunity to speak to someone who runs a business that spans 41 countries, has around 185,000 employees, revenues of $65 billion, market cap of $100 billion, and more importantly, has been around in some form since 1857, which is the first war of Indian independence. It makes sense to talk about longevity. So in this, the 100th year of Hindustan Times, Kumar Birla is going to tell us his secret for longevity, right? And I'm going to start off by pointing out the fact that the average age of the company in the S&P index is only 22, right? And you look at all the big companies which are in the tech field. Google is only 28, Microsoft is only 49. Walmart, which is the company which is on top of the Fortune 500 listings, is only 62. So when you really look at a company that's been around in some form since 1857, you have to ask how, which is what I'm asking you, right? I mean, how do you...
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Sounds like an easy one, but it requires some introspection. I think a few important things. One, of course, is that a company is not just a repository of shareholders' wealth. A company is much more than that. It's a repository of people's trust, especially the trust of shareholders, customers, suppliers. So I think trust and values is a very big part of it. Values for us is very important. I think that our values keep us together. The fact that we are so diversified across businesses, we have a multinational presence, different kinds of people and different businesses. Values is a very important thing that I think has passed down. It's something that you kind of absorb, you're indoctrinated into. So I would say it's values is a very big part of it. People, like you said, we are 185,000 strong people. I'm the only person from the family who's actively involved in running the business. My son was actively involved for 4 years, but he's away doing his MBA at Harvard, coming back in May. My daughter is involved partly, but her own business has grown much faster than she had thought. She's in microfinance. So they made an acquisition in the last 2 years. They've got private equity. So a lot of her time is taken up by that for now. So I think the fact that we are so large, diversified, I'm the only one from the family, obviously means that we are a very highly delegated and decentralized organization, which means that, as I call it, it's a people's organization. It's the people who run it, very people-focused, high performance, high accountability also, since it's so people-driven. And I think we're very invested in our people, invested in their careers, invested in adding intrinsic value to them. And I think the important thing there is that we're a meritocracy. So you rise up the ranks as fast as your performance. There's nothing really else that matters. So in many ways, your career is really in your own hands. So I think the two big pieces would be values, and the other would be the way you treat people, the kind of people you have, empowering them, treating them with respect is something that most people want more than just a higher paycheck. I'd say these are the two big pegs for us.
One of the things in business, and I used to be a business journalist for a long time, was that especially when you And I know there may be some multinational managers here, and your company is in some ways a multinational. But when you look at the local arms of multinationals, and there's a certain model on how they work, right? At least at the leadership level. The typical stint is for 3 years. So the first year is spent bad-mouthing your predecessor, right? And usually this is done by taking a huge charge. And then the second year you do whatever you have to do, and the third year you basically lobby for your next post, which you want to go to Europe or you want to go somewhere in Latin America or wherever. One of the things that strikes me when I look at organizations such as yours, which has been there for a long time, is really continuity, right? And I buy your fact about you being the only one from the family there and all that, but I would like to argue that the family does bring something to it, right? I mean, there is something that you have learned from your father, from your grandfather, which has sort of distilled down. What is that?
Yeah, that's very distinct, and I think that's about values. Again, I think that the fact that my great grandfather G.D. Birla was a very close associate of Mahatma Gandhi, and he fully embraced this what we call a socio-economic concept of trusteeship, which means that companies are not just emblems of capitalism; they're also institutions of collective prosperity. So it was a more nuanced sort of description of what a private company should be. And that kind of ethos or philosophy has come down the generations. It's something that's very deeply ingrained. I can't tell you exactly how it functions, but it functions all the time when you're taking an important decision. This is something, it's like being in the DNA. And again, I think it's about people. It's how how you treat people. It's about how much, like I said, in our case, we're a people's organization. We truly are. And, people feel empowered, people feel accountable, people know that we invest in them. And that gives a different sort of a sense of commitment. For example, I have more than 4,000 people who've been with me for 20 years and more. So that also brings about continuity because, they've lived with the organization, they've done different things, they've played different roles, they've been in different countries, different businesses. But the fact is that, we've all grown up together. So of course there is continuity in terms of family legacy. I think legacy is very important. But I think the fact that you have employees who are high performers and who've been with the company a long time also brings about an element of continuity.
What is, I really want to know more, so I'm going to ask you a follow-up in a very specific way. What is the one business lesson which you repeatedly give your children?
I think we don't give our children lessons. That was meant for the generation before us. We are more the sandwich generation. But I think one thing that I learned from previous generations, and one thing that I do tell my children, is that there are no shortcuts. That's again very ingrained in our way of doing business. That's a legacy that's come down. And if I look back at the last 30 years of my being there, I don't think we've achieved anything that's significant on account of taking a shortcut. So whatever we've achieved, we've gone through the rough and tumble of it. We've gone through the whole 9 yards. No shortcuts, I think, is a very important one for me, also for my children. I can see it in them.
You spoke a little bit about, this social emphasis that needs to be there for business. And how do you position a business in the social and national context? I ask this because, our own example at Hindustan Times, for instance, how it emerged as a voice of the freedom movement. But also, if you look at your group's involvement in building India's industrial backbone in the early years, right? So it was positioned in a certain social and national context. How significant are national priorities to a business?
So, if I go back in time, our flagship company, Grasim, was founded just 10 days after independence by my great-grandfather, G.D. Birla. And the idea then was partition had just happened and very large tracts of cotton growing land had gone to Pakistan. And I think obviously the desire was that we become therefore self-sustaining in man-made fibers, which was the closest substitute for cotton. At that time, even our metals companies, I think that was how they were born. At that time, the birth of businesses was based on national priority. I think now it's different. I mean, you're not going to invest in a business because it's a national priority, but the fact that infrastructure is going to be a big, investment if we are to grow at 7-8% and see multi-decadal growth, it's very clear that infrastructure, metals, cement, metals will be something that will be required in good measure. So I think there is an intrinsic involvement of what national priorities are. For example, when we started financial services, it was a nation coming of age, financialization. The average person was becoming more aware about his or her savings, was becoming more financially literate. So there is always an element of the phase of the country's growth curve that you are in that would determine which business you want to get into.
Where do you see our growth curve at this point in time, our country's growth curve at this point in time? Where are the opportunities?
There are lots of them. I think infra is clearly one. Like I said, growing at 7-8%, we are the fastest growing large economy in the world. So clearly, we have to build infrastructure. And I must say that the government has done a very credible job of investing in infrastructure. And infra is one. Digital, clearly, it's becoming a smaller and smaller world because of the digital economy. Again, India has done a great job, especially led by the government. I think that's another big opportunity. And there are several more on, consumer is another one. There's never a dearth of opportunities. I mean, India meets opportunities. Talent has more opportunities today than ever before in the past. So I think that there are a plethora of opportunities. It depends on what you have the appetite for and the passion for.
Going back to the social and national context, everyone understands the fact, and this is true of even the new age entrepreneurs, of the need to give back, right? So there is philanthropy, but some of it is it's good, but it's also passive. Your group has done both, right? I mean, you give a lot of money, which is the passive part, but there are also active things that you do, right? Like run really good schools and colleges. I myself am a beneficiary from this. I went to BITS, and I've often told people that BITS made me what I am. And so it's a very deep involvement in certain sectors, and I've seen that you've sort of broad-based that more. You've now got a school of management, you've got a school of law.
I think that's something that gives us great joy. BITS was founded by my great-grandfather, G.D. Birla, and my granduncle, K.K. Birla, ran it for the longest time, grew it on the foundation that was built by his father. I've had the privilege of running it for almost 15 years now. I increasingly spend more time on it. Education. I'm a great believer in education. In my own case, the way life panned out for me, my father passed away very early and all of that. I think if I didn't have the qualifications I did, life would have been so much tougher. So the transformative role of education is something that you can't deny. And that's what drives me to spend time on an institution like BITS. Of course, it's a legacy. But I think the transformation, the transformative impact it has on its students is something that's very apparent. So we've started recently a school of management. We started a school of design, a school of law. It's a great brand, and I think that it's just a transformative impact, like I said, it has on people's lives that is so fulfilling.
Everyone speaks about culture, right? I mean, I think it was Drucker who once said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And you hear about um, companies which do things in a certain way and which were uh, built around a certain kind of culture. What is the Birla way?
So I want to keep coming back to this. One is values. The other is people. Very important. I think, they are the backbone of the organization. They are the asset that sort of doesn't show up on the balance sheet, but is what drives the company. A few more things. One is scale. So we want to be number one or two in every business that we are in or we get into. So like they say, scale isn't everything, but it's the only thing. Without scale, I think it's very difficult to survive today unless you have something very niche, let's say very high technology, which gives you very high margins. So scale is very important. For example, we built our cement business 100 million tons in 36 years. In the next 5 years, we've got to 150. In another 5 years, we'll get to 200. And scale is fun. It gives you a much broader canvas to work on. I think that looking at businesses from the long run, that is in many ways a promoter's prerogative. So when Hindalco acquired Novelis, paid $6 billion and acquired a company that in fact was much larger than it. The stock took a beating, investors wrote us off, took about a year to come back. Any professional CEO who had taken that decision would have been sacked. Because it just seemed at that time to be the wrong thing to do. And I think as a promoter, I had the prerogative and the desire to see much beyond not just quarters, but years. So running businesses for the long run is something that is a culture with us. And another sort of important aspect for us, you can call it culture, it does amount to culture, is the fact that we measure performance by cash. So you have revenue, it's great, you have EBITDA, even better. But at the end of the day, businesses need to have the right economics at a unit level, and they also need to generate cash. That's how you grow and build on what you've grown. That broadly would be the culture that would define us.
Speaking of scale, right, that probably explains why you have been as acquisition oriented as you have, right? Because if you have to be number one or two in everything, it doesn't make sense to keep building. Sometimes it also makes sense to keep buying. But like you said, many of these acquisitions, especially the global acquisitions, take some time to pan out. And it's the reason why analysts respond to every acquisition negatively, right? I mean, the share price immediately falls. And you just gave the example of Novelis, but part of that also comes from the fact that this is how you think, right? This is how you have been taught to think. This is the kind of long-termism that probably being a Birla gives you. I mean, someone else may get it by being someone else, but it's a very family thing, isn't it? It's a very family thing.
Long term, yes, very much so. I think that building businesses for the long term has been very much a family legacy. But I think, each one has their own way of interpreting it. My father was a product of, he came in at a time when India was opening its doors to the world. My grandfather, for example, built his businesses in a time of scarcity. My great-grandfather, India was just getting its freedom. So everyone's context has been different. And leadership always has to be contextual.
Does it, when you look at it from the longevity perspective, how important are brands? Or because your strength, at least in the early years, was all in commodities, and you've since ventured into some really strong brands across both industrial products as well as retail products. But how significant and important are brands from the perspective of longevity?
So I think for B2C businesses, clearly brands are very important. They give you stickiness. They create a moat around the business. Many of our businesses up until now have been more B2B businesses. But I must tell you that they have their own set of challenges. So if you're, let's say if you have, Tesla as a customer or Ford or Boeing, they are very exacting customers. So you don't have the challenge of maintaining and nurturing a brand, but the challenge is very different. What we have to do for them, let's say, in this case, Novelis again, is very demanding. It's a different kind of challenge altogether. Having said that, we leverage the power of the group's brand, uh, and that is a huge leverage for us. Often the company's name becomes a brand also, more and more in the B2B segment. So I think in the non-consumer businesses that we are in, these are the two brands that we leverage.
We've talked largely about the past. If you were to talk about the future, next 100 years, what are the opportunities you see? Where do you see your own group?
Next 100 years, talking about next 100 years, days,
Next 100
quarters,
years.
very difficult to, it's crystal ball gazing. 100 years is too far away. But I think that we will be a much more,
What
even
would
more.
be the outer limit of your crystal ball gazing? 50 years? 25 years?
No, 10 years. I think it's such a fast changing world. There's so much happening. The pace of change has changed, actually. If you think about it, it's much more ferocious now. We used to discuss 15 years, 20 years in our business kind of strategy plans. It doesn't go beyond 10 years now because it could be a very different world in 10 years. So you're really talking about a world that you have no knowledge about. You have no idea what the world will be, what the consumer will look like, what he or she will want, what the skill sets required to succeed will be. So I think, yeah, 100 years. But I do know that India will become a much, much more consequential economy. I do know that HT will have another editor, for example. But I think, yeah, I think that, anything digital clearly is going to be something that will be in fashion even then.
You spoke about the pace of change, and you spoke about, how difficult it is to think beyond 10 years. What does that mean for really long-term investments that probably require more time to pay off? Has that window also shortened?
No. I think 10 years was a bit of an exaggeration, but if you talk about all of our businesses, I mean, the investments we make, we have $20 billion of announced investments that are on the ground. Obviously, you look at, because a lot of them are in the manufacturing space, you would look at the next 15, 20 years. Shorter than that doesn't make sense in the kind of businesses that we're in. If on the other hand, you're looking at fashion retail or jewelry retail or financial services, then you're looking at a much shorter time frame. An investor doesn't think about return on his mutual fund investment 20 years from now. He looks at 1 year or 2 years or 3 years at the maximum, which means that our horizon also, our time horizon, as people who are promoting and running the business also becomes that much shorter. So also for fashion retail, I mean, no one's thinking about 20 years from now, right? You go into a shop, you buy what you like, and if you don't, you vote with your dollars and you walk out. So the consumer-led businesses, I think the durability is much less in some ways.
You've entered a clutch of consumer-oriented businesses in recent years. Paints, for instance, jewelry, for instance. What is the logic? How do you identify which businesses to enter?
So retail, we've been around for almost 25 years. So jewelry is a retail format, right? You have an aspirational Indian wants to spend more on experience, so on and so forth. It's also an industry which is growing very fast. And you have examples of players who've created a lot of value. You have only 1 or 2 national players. So that kind of gave us a niche that we could belong to. Paints, being in the cement business, for example, you have distribution that's common. And distribution is a very important success factor in a business like paints. But the thing is that we've built 40% of the industry's capacity at one go. The industry capacity has been built over 40 years, I think. And at the end of this financial year, we'll be the combined capacity of the second, third, fourth, and fifth player in the market. So again, scale becomes very important. And that's what's driven these investments. Also, I think we've, from what we've learned in financial services, in some of our retail formats, it's given us more confidence to come closer to the customer.
I have one final question for you, and I'm hoping you'll give it some due consideration before you answer. Like I said, I've been a business journalist for a long time, and one of the things that struck me about your businesses and about you personally was the fact that you've always managed to avoid controversy. So how have you done this? Because these days, it's very easy to get caught up in any of these controversies. So what is your recipe for avoiding
that's not my style to get into controversies. Frankly, I have enough controversies in my personal life over a period of time in a light-hearted way. But I think that controversies take a lot of time and a lot of energy, to be honest, from a very practical point of view. And I'm not the sort of person who will, first of all, we're interested in running our own race. We are really not interested in what's happening with someone else's life or some other business house. That's just not the way we think. And I think that keeps you out of controversies.
Great. Kumar Mangalam Birla, thank you very much.
Thanks, Kumar. Thank you.